Let's just jump right into this explainer where we're going to unpack the profound and honestly pretty heartbreaking emotional complexity of Lisa Brennan-Jobs' childhood. We're talking about what it's actually like to exist in the vast, often painful space between two entirely different universes. It's really the story of how a child tries to make sense of a phantom presence in her life.
Picture this. We're starting right in the thick of it with a truly startling confession. An adult Lisa is wandering barefoot through her dying father's sterile, quiet mansion, and she's just taking things. Mundane objects. We're talking blush, toothpaste, a couple of chipped finger bowls. Why? Just to feel some sort of tangible connection. She actually describes the urge arriving like a physical thirst. It's this incredibly powerful image, right? Trying to grasp onto someone who, his whole life, was always just out of reach. And that raw, visceral honesty completely sets the stage for her incredible memoir, Small Fry. In it, she recounts growing up as the daughter of tech icon Steve Jobs and struggling artist Chrisann Brennan. But here's the thing. What you should really take away from this isn't some dry piece of tech history. No, it's a deeply human narrative. It's about a girl desperately seeking a concrete outline in the shadow of absolute giants, just trying to find her own identity amidst their chaotic orbits.
So, to really understand this massive divide, we actually have to flash back to where it all started. 1972, Homestead High School in Cupertino. This is where her parents first met. They bonded over Bob Dylan lyrics and animated student films while hanging out in the high school quad. Steve even held candles in the dark for Chrisann so she could see while she drew her claymation characters. I mean, it's a surprisingly tender, almost poetic beginning, especially when you contrast it with the bitter divisions that came later.
But things changed fast, and Steve's denial of his daughter became tightly woven with his rising fame. He actively denied paternity. He literally swore in a deposition that he was sterile until a brand new DNA blood test proved a 94.4% match. And the timing here is absolutely wild. The child support case was finalized on December 8, 1980, rushed through by Steve's lawyers. Well, just 4 days later, Apple went public, and virtually overnight, he was worth over $200 million.
Shortly after that court case closed, a newly multimillionaire Steve Jobs introduced himself to a 2.5-year-old Lisa by straight up declaring he was one of the most important people she would ever know. Imagine saying that to a toddler. By doing that, he instantly cemented his role as this cold, phantom presence in her life. It totally sets the tone for the unbelievable psychological distance between them. So you might be wondering, how does a child even begin to mentally map two completely disjointed worlds like that? Well, to explain their finances to young Lisa, her mother compared their own meager reality to a tiny ripped scrap of paper. Steve's wealth, on the flip side, was described as a giant, endless roll of white craft paper. It's basically a child's understanding of massive inequality made devastatingly tangible. And we see those stark contrasts even in their rare physical interactions. Sure, Steve might be physically holding her hands or lifting her up, but in the broader narrative of her day-to-day life, he was usually emotionally distant, completely unpredictable, or just entirely absent. He was basically a mythological figure who occasionally dropped into her reality, seemingly just to remind her of everything she didn't have. To really grasp that divide, you have to hear this story. Steve once casually offered Chrisann an extra couch from his massive Monte Sereno mansion. Well, terrified he would change his mind or just throw it away before they could go get it, Chrisann literally scaled the exterior wall of his locked, empty house, broke in through a second-story window, and then let her friend in through the front door just to take the couch he'd already offered her. I mean, wow! As they drove away with this couch shoved in the back of a van, police cars actually sped past them in the opposite direction. It turns out the break-in had triggered a silent alarm. Chrisann just laughed it off and said, "We might have gone to jail." This story brilliantly hits the nail on the head, showing the wild, desperate energy of her mother's world directly colliding with the isolated, heavily guarded security of her father's. And the reality of that bohemian upbringing was deeply, relentlessly nomadic. Lisa and her mother moved 13 times by the time Lisa was just 7 years old. 13. They relied on welfare, waitressing, house cleaning, constantly renting out informal temporary spaces. But her mother fought so incredibly hard to survive and maintain her identity as an artist. She created a world for Lisa that was vibrant, chaotic, and smelled intensely of things like eucalyptus, raw cookie dough, and wet dirt. But as you can imagine, the pressure of single motherhood on the very edge of poverty was immense, and sometimes it just broke her. There's this one terrifying scene during a frantic car ride in the pouring rain where a lost, exhausted Chrisann screamed at the windshield in total despair, yelling that she wanted out. Meanwhile, a 4-year-old Lisa just sat rigidly in her car seat, silently praying to a tiny chip in the glass to keep them safe. It's a stark, heartbreaking reminder of the fragile tightrope they were walking every single day. Meanwhile, Steve remained this towering, invisible figure in the background. Once he promised to deliver a bed for Lisa's new skylight alcove. The anticipation for this was electric. Lisa literally dressed up in a nice outfit just to wait for him. But he never arrived. They waited and watched the street for hours, but he didn't show. His absence in these moments wasn't just some scheduling conflict. It was a devastating, repeated reminder of their disconnect. It took these magical, hopeful days and crushed them back into dull, ordinary ones.
Now, when he actually did sporadically bring them into his world, the vast differences in their realities were deeply jarring. Just imagine being a kid constantly worried about having enough money for groceries, and then suddenly you're thrust into the orbit of a man whose wealth was entirely abstract and unfathomable. What does that do to a person's brain? It created this strange, undeniable psychological whiplash.
Case in point, during one of those rare visits, Steve drove them in his Porsche to a newly purchased, cavernous mansion that even had rooms filled with pipe organs. When Chrisann pointed out the sheer scale of the house, Steve just bluntly dismissed it. He claimed the construction was garbage, said he planned to tear the massive house down, and insisted he only bought the estate for the antique oak trees on the lot. Imagine hearing someone say that when your own entire life is defined by housing instability. Just mind-blowing.
It really was a collision of two entirely different sensory realities. On one hand, you had the earthy smell of bay laurel and the vibrant, anxious chaos of Chrisann's world. And then on the other, Steve's world was defined by empty mansions, sterile white walls, the hum of expensive medical equipment, and cold perfection. We are looking at two deeply flawed, vastly different human realities existing entirely at odds with each other.
And unfortunately, that cold perfection persisted right up to the very end. Even on his deathbed, Steve's interactions could be devastatingly blunt. After Lisa sprayed an expired natural rose facial mist in his bathroom, really just trying to feel some sense of presence and outline in that sterile space, she leaned in to hug him goodbye. He smelled like medicine sweat, and his parting words to his daughter were simply, "You smell like a toilet."
Which brings us right back to our opening scene. How do we reconcile the brilliant, mythologized figures of our culture with their desperately complex, flawed human realities as parents? This explainer isn't just about Steve Jobs. It's about the invisible lines that connect us to our parents, the trauma of broken promises, and the random things we try to steal back just to feel whole. It leaves us with a pretty heavy question. What truly makes a legacy? Is it what we build for the world, or is it what we leave behind in the people who loved us?